I think we should just dive in. So, Dalton, this is now your third series of films that you've done in collaboration with Art South Dakota, and they've all been really interesting. And I like this series because it's just a little different than anything you've done before for Art South Dakota. In addition to each piece, which we'll get into, how did you find these artists? How did you select the artists to be involved? Because there's so many amazing artists all throughout the state. So how did you kind of work it so it'd be a cohesive group and kind of get in touch with these folks?
Well, it wasn't easy to find everybody. And I first started with reaching out to past artists. That was kind of the first. I thought, they might be able to refer me to somebody, and a few of them did. And I found too that that's kind of difficult because a lot of artists, myself included, I learned that we kind of have a tendency sometimes to keep our head down, do our thing, play in our corner of the sandbox, and at least that's how I am. That's how a number of the artists that I've worked with are, and so by and large, I think a lot of them are that way. There was no one clear path, is what I found. It wasn't cut and dry. I thought I would go ask artists, and they would say, absolutely, here's 10 people, and then I would go weed out those people and then choose one or two, and it was way more complicated than that, which I think is. In a lot of ways, I think that's art. That's the world of art. It is way more complicated than people think, and I kind of found some encouragement in it, frankly, that it wasn't just super easy, like referring a mechanic or somebody that does landscaping. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but a little more. Look them up in the phone book. Artists just aren't like that.
Yeah, and I think that it's especially in South Dakota where we have such a giant landmass.
It's huge. And
that from having produced films and played music and done so much across the state. But it's just a huge landmass to try to get around. And I think that per capita, we have probably even more creative people, but it's just sometimes the per capita in a county is pretty small, just because that county is pretty small. And so just getting around and getting those references, combining that with, like you mentioned, that so often as artists we're in our own woodsheds getting stuff done. So you kind of talked about chasing down the story and really finding it and finding a subject that would inspire you to want to tell their story and not having that clear path. I see a little bit of resonance with, you're a musician, you're an improvisatory musician, and I see a little resonance there where it's not that you're improvising the whole film necessarily, but that you're willing to let the story take you somewhere and kind of speak for itself and find it rather than force it. Is that something you've thought about as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I absolutely will submit to the moment and the emotion and my gut. I like to. I've often found that that's right, or at least to me seems right when I'm there. I'll plan things because you have to plan things. That's a safety net for me. If nothing else, I can do what I've planned. But usually when I show up, and whether this is filming artists or whether it was doing my own narrative work, you get there and then sometimes you get up to the line of scrimmage and you go, not what I thought. And when you're doing it with other artists, it's a lot of fun because there are a lot of them the same way. A lot of us artists are very, this is what I had set out to do. Here's what I ended up with because I followed whatever those instincts were. And luckily for me, the artists were very. I would look at their work. I would come up with I would do a lot of research on them before I ever even reached out to them, and then I would reach out, and they don't know me, and so to come out and say, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think of this? And they were so willing to. They were like, yeah, absolutely.
I think when folks get a chance to watch all of these pieces, they'll really see that each one of them is radically different. But they feel cohesive in that they were, it was a singular vision from your perspective in collaboration with each of these artists, and they really come across that way. So, what was your process in approaching each of these pieces? Did you kind of craft an idea to bring to the artist? Did you work on the idea together with the artist? A little bit of both?
It was a little bit of both, depending on the artist. Morgan Field, she was the first one that I did. and hers was very exploratory. I went out, I looked at her work, and I loved it, and I was like, I really want to talk to her. And I didn't know where it would go until I talked to her, and that's how it is with a lot of them. But I had an idea kind of going in that a lot of her work, because she works with a lot of different mediums, she does a lot of great stuff, and I would highly recommend people check out her other work. But specifically the sculptures with barbed wire, I mean, this is a thing that is made to I mean, it'll hurt you if you're not careful with it. And it's tough to work with, and there's just, I was really drawn to that because I think as artists, you know, we kind of, myself included, we sort of deal with pain in a lot of different ways. That's one of the best ways, I think, to cope with it, frankly. And so hers I knew was going to be a little, I don't want to say darker, but for lack of a better word, it was a little
introspective.
Yes, very much
interior.
so.
Yeah,
and she said what she said so well, so well spoken. But I had an idea going into that, and then there was a section when I was talking to her, and because we had an off-camera interview that we recorded, and there was a moment there when she talked about chasing sort of that inner monster to find, you know, to get to the middle of it, and I just thought, that's it. That's the direction that we're going to get. And I didn't know that until after I got there, and we were an hour into talking.
Yeah.
And so I filmed a little bit of her, but that was very exploratory. Something like Aaron Murtha's, that was scripted. I wrote that based on I was just inspired by her work, and I went, this is what it feels like to me. And I hadn't even, and this is a testament, I think, to Erin and the level of work that she does, and the expression that she's able to put forth, because I said, this is what it makes me feel like. And then I got a hold of her, and I sat down with her, and we had coffee, and I talked to her about it, and she's like, yes, I love it. That's great. So I felt like she communicated that to me. I was able to then, as a filmmaker, internalize it, write it out, and communicate it back to her, and she went, yes.
Yeah.
And that is I think that's the ultimate sort of form of conversation between two artists. And so, like I said before, I wanted to make something with them, not about them. And so that one very much was a scripted narrative, calculated. She memorized this stuff. We worked together, and okay, what are you sewing? And I'm sewing a pair of 1987 Mazda Miatas or whatever they were. And you know, I think the script said that she was sewing a baked potato, but she's like, that doesn't look good. Partway through sewing, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So she's like, let's maybe change that, you
Yeah.
know, to the Mazda Miatas. And so, you know, she was obviously, it's all her.
Yeah.
As much as it can. I just wanted to try to capture the essence of what it was that she was doing, and what she kind of, I feel like, exudes as an artist.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's not that dissimilar in many ways to telling other stories in film, non-documentary even, of just finding what this experience or this character or this premise is trying to say, and then kind of reflecting that back in film versus, you know, the artist's typical art form.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, like with Jeff Paul, that was another one that was very explore. I went in there with a totally different idea, thinking, this is the angle I'm going to go with. Because I know Jeff. I've known Jeff for a while myself, and I thought, I think it'll be like this. This will probably be the way to go. And then we get in there and we start talking, and then he started talking about improvisation and music and the language, and I was like, oh, that's it right there. Of course, he literally was kind of speaking my language there too as a musician.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, you know, everything you're saying. So that one might have been, if I could admit, you know, a little self-indulgent.
Yeah. Well, you know, this might be a good opportunity to jump ahead just a little bit to, you know, you did the music for all of these pieces too, for the most part. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
For, I think, 3 out of the 5.
Yeah.
Jeff did his own,
Yep.
of course, because we filmed him playing a piece after we had done the interview. And then Sheldon's was a piece that I had found. You know, he was a little more, you know, kind of in the punk rock sort of thing, which I have nothing against. It's just not my
not
field
your
of
language,
expertise necessarily as a musician. But the rest of them were original music. And Aaron's was my sister-in-law, Liz Teal, actually played the score, and we kind of woodshedded that together. I owe her a lot for that one, though. I said, here's kind of what I'm thinking, kind of the harpsichord sort of thing. And so she's like, oh, okay. And so then we kind of went through every single section like this. Okay, play the same melody, but you make it minor.
Yeah.
And then end on a major. Okay. And so it was a lot of fun, and she did a great job. And then Tim's was, when I saw Tim's work, I immediately thought of Roy Rogers. And then I thought of Sergio Leone and the old westerns, Once Upon a Time in the West and A Few Dollars More and all of these films. And so I thought, I want to marry those two things together. I tried to do it visually some, but mostly with the music and with the score. I tried to do that. And so it literally is kind of a version of Happy Trails, the song is.
Yeah.
And so that one was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You get to make them you get to push them over the finish line, make them into something that they weren't before. And then with Morgan's, again, very introspective. So that was one that I just kind of went in with myself and just thought, what is this making me feel?
Even if you were the one doing a lot of the music, it's another artist you're collaborating with as a filmmaker. And
Exactly.
And it was really interesting to have each of these pieces really has multiple art forms, multiple collaborators all coming together to tell that story, which is, I think, makes them really interesting. What really struck you about Sheldon as an artist and made you kind of excited to collaborate on this piece?
Well, the first thing was he's multidisciplinary. And there's a lot of artists that are, but his combination of kind of 80s and 90s graphic design and color, and he kind of and he was a musician. He's a musician as well. Kind of grew up in sort of the punk era and punk rock kind of influence, and then started getting into stand-up. And so then there was another element of his, when I'd never done anything with it. It's a part of the performing arts, of course, but I'd never done anything with a stand-up comic, and I thought that could be really interesting. And when I talked to him, I could tell he was like, well, I don't know if I'd call it an art form. He even says it in the video. I don't know if I would necessarily call it an art form, and of course I'm like, it absolutely is, Sheldon. Like, it 100% is an art form, and he's very good at it. And he just has a perspective that all artists do. They just they have their own perspective, but his life and his growing up and where he was from and how he then is channeling that into what he does, I loved it. I found it interesting. And I wish I could have done more on his graphic design work, but I tried to kind of incorporate some elements of that in just the assembly of the film, the design of the film. He was just great. He was just such a great presence. Again, going out and talking to him, made a couple of last minute decisions there of like how we're going to shoot this. And I thought, I want you on the stage. I want you talking into the microphone.
Yeah.
And we're going to record the line level out of the microphone. And you're really painting yourself into a corner when you do things technically like that. But I thought, no, this is it. This is the vibe. This is what I want. And another element of his was I wanted to film some of it on a 1990s like Sony Handycam. And so I have one as a high 8mm Handycam. And so I was cutting back and forth between the two, and it just worked. It just helped with the vibe. It felt very much Sheldon. When I talked to him about it over the phone, he was super excited about it. And so that was fun, just filming his set and doing but somebody like Sheldon, he needs more than 3-4 minutes to capture who he is. I could make a feature film on Sheldon Starr.
Yeah.
He's incredible.
I think that's a common thing I notice with artists in the region is that they say, well, I'm not really an artist, or this isn't really art. And it's like, well, no, it's very much so. A, it is inherently art. B, it is just as valuable as any other art. And C, as soon as you're, the first time you get paid for a gig or the first time you sell a piece of work, then now you are a professional working artist. I mean,
exactly.
That is literally the definition of what you are. You sold your art, and so trying to get people to really kind of hold on to that in a positive way of it's not good nor bad, it just is, and embracing that and kind of taking on that identity to allow yourself to continue doing the work.
Exactly.
Know?
And some artists need it and some artists don't.
Yep.
Some artists are fine with whether you call it art or not.
Yep.
I just love it.
Yep, exactly. And that's the important thing. I think what I find a lot in the Midwest is people that slow down their work because they don't think they're really an artist, and like, well, I don't know if I should be spending time on this, or it's like, well, no, you really are. And like, if you want to do this, then do it. Great.
You should absolutely be spending time on it.
Yep, 100%.
I think I found Tim maybe on Instagram, actually. I think we had a mutual friend that tagged some of his work in their story, and I saw it, and I was, what is this? Who is this? And I realized, he's in the state, and I think he's out of Aberdeen right now. And I was struck by his work. I loved it. It was just so imaginative, so fanciful, and yet rooted in just like rural memory.
Mm-hmm.
Like how you, and he talks about that. Like, this is how you, it's kind of like how you remember these things from when you were a kid. And that's why the scale doesn't matter, because he does things in these, they're large pieces considering it's a piece of art, but they're small considering they're sort of a miniature replica of old signage that would have been, of course, several stories high, things that you would have been passing by through. But they're also, there's this little twist on them. There's this little bent of like, wait, that's not, something's off about that. And I just loved that. I loved the everything's just slightly off kilter.
But what I like about his work is even where it's surreal and off kilter, there's still a logic to it in some ways, but it's the logic of a child or of a dream. You know what I mean? Where it makes sense in and of itself, even though when you analyze every little detail, you're like, well, wait, that's a little off kilter. That's a little not what you'd expect.
Exactly. Yeah. But yet you see it, and you recognize it. Mm-hmm. And there's something about it that you feel like, no, I'm recognizing this. I'm connecting this to a memory, even though it's not quite right.
We mentioned a little bit earlier, this is the third series of films you've done in collaboration with Art South Dakota now, starting, I think, originally in 2017, 2018. I think the first ones were released. Yeah. And before I even started working with Art South Dakota. Each one of the series each series within this larger project has had a little bit of its own identity and a little bit of its own voice. But, how do you see these different approaches both complementing each other and contrasting each other? I bring that up because having watched some of the old pieces, to me, they play well together. They don't seem like, these are three totally different worlds. I would like to watch all of these in conjunction. Do you see any way that they kind of complement or contrast the ways you've envisioned them?
I always try to leave myself open to pivot. If I see, again, if something's inspiring me or this seems to be going a different direction, let's follow that vein. But it really came to light, I feel like, in the series, in the Panorama. And it really, there was a moment. There was like a moment that everything changed for me, and that was Brian Akipa. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten a lot of feedback on that's one of my favorite, Brian Akipa and Dakaway with Dr. Craig Howe. Those are two of my all-time favorite pieces because they really kind of changed me as an artist. And Brian's in the sense of, I went there just to interview Brian. Like, I was just, there's a cool old church that he was talking about. I'll interview. I was just going to ask him a couple of questions. Yeah. He was a part of an overall video that I was going to put together. And then he wound up being the whole video. Because of what happened. I was like, let's get some B-roll of you in here. And it was incredible. And then I asked him a couple of really kind of just simple questions. And of course, Brian, in his matter-of-fact way, was just so profound. Yeah. And that was it. I realized that at that moment, this could be anything. If you were just willing to just follow an instinct, follow a prompt, whatever that may be. And so from there on out, I was like, I want to go in prepared. I don't want to go in planned too much. And so as far as contrasting goes, there's a lot of, I, as a filmmaker, I've been doing my own films and my own stuff separate from, obviously, those videos. And so I'm growing over here on my own track. So then when I turn back and I revisit the arts and the artists in the state, as I do in these videos, I'm a little bit different. I think, as you mentioned, I'm the kind of the through line, but yet I'm also the thing that I feel like is changing and I'm the thing that I'm the one that can be directly compared because I'm the one that's coming back. All these artists are different. It's not like I'm going and I made 3 different videos about Brian Akipa, and to see how that changed, that would be fascinating. To see how that would evolve. The first round was kind of like you said. It was a little bit more of there was a path that was set forth, and we kind of had to walk that a little bit, but still making it about the artists and still showcasing them and being true to who they were. And then the next one, and in that moment with Brian, and then with Dr. Howe, and going out to Karen's and visiting. I went out there twice. I went out there the first time, and I saw what he was doing in person, and I was able to talk to him. And that was a moment that I went, I'm throwing everything out the window. I literally left and filmed nothing. I came back like a few months later with a different concept, a different idea, and kind of a different spirit about the whole thing. And then ended up getting what we got. And that was all put together, just and trying to pull all those artists and all those pieces together and just presenting it. Because it's just, and again, you can't do it justice in it. Here's a 3-minute video. But you do the best that you can. And and then with the latest, if at each one of them I was opening up just a little bit more the throttle of, this could be anything, and do not put any kind of barriers on anything. It was wide open on this last series. I absolutely put no barriers on anything. I put no constraints on anything. There were no boxes that anything gets put into. It's just open. And then I found, I think, 5 very unique artists, and then tried, like I said before, to not get in the way of who they were and do them justice. The last thing in the world I would want is to go, that's a nice film, but that's not me. So, and they haven't done that. So that's good.
How do you think this series of films has changed you as an artist?
It's a tough thing to answer. There's the practical stuff, like I mentioned a little bit before, of just be ready for anything and be open to following anything that happens. I always kind of was, but now I'm excited, to be that way, and that's part of what excites me about it. It used to be what scared me about it was, well, this could go any direction. I'll just try to be prepared enough to, be able to hold onto the reins, depending on the direction it goes. But to now be just really excited about that, and that definitely has infiltrated my other work, and then getting to, because most artists have a perspective of the world. That's what they're doing 90% of the time, is they're either internalizing something and or they just have some perspective on either their past or their present or the future. And that's one of the things that I love to tap into, and one of the things that I love about doing it myself, because everything that I'm doing is a sense of healing. Everything that I do, I think filmmaking and storytelling and art in general is the absolute best way to do that. And Morgan's, I think, is a great example of taking something and saying, I'm using this to heal. Maybe and maybe maybe it'll help you too. There's definitely I don't know. I wish I had just a good sentence answer. There just isn't. There isn't. It's definitely changed me. It's definitely influenced my work elsewhere. And I would hope that. I would hope that would. I don't know. I can't speak for the artists. I can't speak for them to say that, working with me did that to them. But that wasn't the point. They are in their world and they're doing their thing, and they allowed me into it for a little bit. And then I got to go into someone else's, and I got to go into someone else's, and I got to go into someone else's. And very few artists get to do that. Very few artists get to, as an artist, walk into other artists' studios, all of different mediums and different stuff. They very rarely do that. it's intentional, and I don't think it is. I think what you said earlier, everybody's kind of in their shop building their thing and working on whatever the medium that is. And so I feel privileged, frankly, to have been able to do that, and I didn't want to take it for granted. And it's been hard because I feel like every series I tried to do better, just personally, whatever, just I want to do better. I want to outdo myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember hitting some of those moments, like with Dockaway or with Brian, going, well, I realize it's not up to me to out. That's absolutely the artist, and there's no sense of outdoing anything.
Mm.
Get rid of the sense of competitiveness, even if it's within yourself, because I realize that's not what it is. It's not a competition in any way, shape, or form. Not to me, anyway. I'm not a very competitive person, so maybe that's not fair for me to say that. And to hear, my favorite is when there's it's a YouTube video and there's a YouTuber, the YouTube comments, and what they're saying about the artist, and I love that. I don't want any of them to say anything about the film or the filmmaking or the techniques or anything. I want them to talk about the artist and make comments about him and what people were saying about Brian's, and it is just that's the best. That's super cool. So I'm excited to see where these go and what kind of feedback Art South Dakota gets, and just the art community in general, because I think some of these artists are relatively unknown, and so that's. I hope that changes.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
There are sometimes we have powerful experiences that we can sum up in a single kind of sentence, but I find that most often the experiences that are the most powerful to me are a little bit ineffable. And, and so they're the ones that, yes, I can tell you I'm changed and I cannot tell you how. I can't, I know that something is different after having done this. And that's a really unique point about having or a unique aspect to this is getting to walk in behind the scenes with all of these artists and see not just their work but their process, and try to reflect that back through your medium of film back out to the world. So I'm really excited for others to get to watch this series now. And
Yes.
Have you noticed anything in the arts community in South Dakota? I mean, it's been 8 years since you started working on these. We've gone through a lot of interesting times in those 8 years. And have you noticed anything changing in the arts community in those times?
Well, I think one of the probably most common things that I hear is, and I've said it myself, which is like proclaiming that there's a lot of great art here, and there's a lot of mass, like you've talked about before, like you talked about earlier. There's a lot of mass, and a lot of rural areas, and a lot of really great artists, and that's always been something, and that they've always been here. This isn't new, but what I feel like is maybe what seems to be a little bit different about that is that it's hey, there's a lot here, and we're a rural state. I feel like that's a little more unapologetic.
Yeah.
And I think that's good, in a good way. I think there's a lot of really great art here. Period.
From a perspective of abundance and not an apologetic, you wouldn't guess it, but there's a lot of great art. It's like, no, there is a lot of great art done.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's changed a little bit from the apologetic to the unapologetic. Yeah. And I like that. I think it's a good change. I think it's also over the 8 years, I feel like people are a little more throttled open to do and a little more empowered to do what they want to do. Before, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was that people felt like either they weren't a professional or they needed to be a professional, or that there was some sort of a gate keeper on, until you have sold your work, you are not a professional. I don't really see people talking about that anymore. And that was something that I feel like both artists and non-artists talked about a lot. And I feel like then now they're done. I think the artists have let that go. And I think maybe the non-artists are also slightly maybe
getting closer
to maybe letting that go.
Yeah.
I just think that's a good thing. I feel like it's kind of, I think us artists need to let that go.
Yeah.
And say, well, I'm doing it.
Yep. And there's art happens on every level. Playing music in your basement for your own edification is just as valuable as being a performer on stage. If you just like to do needlework at home, fantastic. If you want to do it for your career and your vocation for the rest of your vocation and advocation, great. But they're all valuable forms of art. But I think more and more artists in South Dakota, there are a lot of hurdles to being a working artist anywhere, especially in South Dakota.
Yes.
But I think that the more the artists can take on that mantle, then I think the audience follows. I think that in South Dakota, we've often waited for the audience to give us permission.
Yeah.
And I think now the artists are doing it, and the audience will come along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I realized that early. Like, no one's going to ask me to make films. They're not. And even now, this is what I do. No one's going to ask me to do it. And I don't do, I used to do a lot more commercial work. I don't really do very much commercial work anymore. But the actual things that mean something to me, the things that are, the things that move me, the thing, that inspire me, that's all in the creative art, film world, music world, all of that stuff. And no one's going to ask me to make a film, and no one's going to ask me to make a record.
And I feel like that's definitely a feeling I get in South Dakota is the openness of the plains seems to be reflected in the interior world of sometimes, on the one hand, it can feel lonely standing and looking for miles and miles and miles on any side of you. But on the other hand, sometimes I never feel more lonely than in a crowd of people.
Yeah.
And there's we don't maybe have some of the infrastructure, and that's something that needs to change, to have a little bit more infrastructure to help support creatives to be able to more easily make the decision to do their work.
There's
even
still more work to be done.
There's still a lot of work to do there, but part of the joy of the area is if you want to do something, you can kind of just go do it. And there's also not as many gatekeepers and barriers to starting it, and takes a little less inertia to change your own creative direction and goals. So
yeah, there's no limiters.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, as far as what you can do as an artist, solely given up to you. There is still, outside of that, and as far as the infrastructure and everything, there's a lot of work to be done, and I would not discount that. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. We know that. You know that as well as I do. Just because just because we can be outlaws, doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, well, maybe we should try to.
There are benefits to civil society as well.
There are benefits to it, but it's mostly just the support, and in order to gain support, I think people have to gain an understanding.
Yeah.
And in order to gain an understanding, a lot of times it's experience and how, because you can't. I mean, I could say, okay, I'm going to throw you in a car and I'm going to drive you out to Mayasan and Sisseton, and I'm going to get Brian to keep over here with his red cedar flute. He's going to sit in this old church and he's going to play something for you, and you're going to sit there, and there are going to be birds that are going to fly in the windows. It's going to be the most incredible thing in the world, and you'll leave there a changed person. But how in the world do we get a few 100,000 people to Mayasan and let Brian play for him? And I don't know, but I wish they could.
Yeah.
It's those moments like that when you go, I wish there were 300,000 people in this room right now.
From an external perspective, having watched these films, that's about as close as I'm going to get to that experience. And that's one thing that has been incredibly valuable and impactful about all of this work you've done, and thank you for doing it over these 8 years, is it's been a glimpse, a window, obviously not the full picture. I mean, they're like you said, they're 3.5 minute pieces. You're never going to capture everything in that amount of time, but they're a glimpse for people to be able to see a little bit about the arts that are happening around the state, a little glimpse into these artists to hopefully both impact them and, I think importantly, pique their curiosity. That's the other thing I really love about all these, is every one of them left me feeling full, like a good full meal, but left me really wanting to learn more and wanting to go and explore these artists and others in the state. And
that's a testament to Art South Dakota for trusting me, because I basically said, if you want me to do a sit-down interview with them, I'm not interested. And they were like, no, we want you to be an artist and go make art with them. And I think that to your point, it calls people to want to seek that out more, I hope.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you again. Really excited for these all to be released and for everyone to get a chance to watch these artists and your collaborations with them. So thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Cool.